Forum, Sri Lanka. Thank you for tuning in with us today, sir. Over to you.
Thank you, Priyanka. Let me first thank you guys for inviting me to the panel. It's one of the best that I have actually got involved in South Asia in a long time, I must say. And so it is an honor and a pleasure for me to join you guys. And let me share my screen. Bhargavi, thanks. That was an excellent presentation, and it trained quite a bit with what I was thinking and what we are thinking and what we do in on the ground, both in Sri Lanka and in the subcontinent. So I will just very quickly share my screen. Um, right. All right. Can you see me, Priyanka, and
Yes,
everyone?
sir. Yes, sir.
Fantastic. All right. Uh, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at some of the backstory to all of the things that we've been discussing here over the last 3 or 4 weeks, and also some of the front story. But I will not be doing, and I will be referencing the mainstream story, of course. But I think that many of the people on this very August panel have already, in very many ways, I think they have already discussed some of these and covered the areas that are important. So what I'm going to be talking to you about today is going to be, I'm going to try to make it as visual as possible so that we can take along quite fast if it's possible. And what I'm going to be talking to you about is climate, water, and the nuancing of all of this in the Indian Ocean region. And for that, I will just first, the first segment of my presentation is going to be based on our lessons from Sri Lanka. And then let's see whether we can look at how those can be utilized in the larger context of the subcontinent. So first, what is Sri Lanka? We have to be very careful here. Sri Lanka, in a nutshell, there are many ways of describing the country, but I would say that Sri Lanka is in a mess. We suffered one of our worst, actually the worst economic meltdown in 2022, and this kind of led to a societal collapse. So the country very quickly suffered this extremely traumatic socio-economic disaster in 2022. And most of the people in the country are trying to figure out how they can get out of this while continuing to be within the debt bind, because we have in this country, and also to a large extent, learned helplessness. We have been taught that we are helpless, and this is one of the reasons why there's such a lot of damage being done that is causing environmental issues in our countries. Uh, so we have forgotten, because of that, in Sri Lanka, four very important things, actually five things, but I'll be looking at only four of them. Uh, it is one of the richest in terms of bioassets. Its agrobiodiversity is absolutely magical. We have more than 550 food crops available in a country that is only, it's a little, I think it's a little bit smaller than Andhra or Karnataka. We have some of the highest intellectual assets channeled into ICT. So the technology aspect is extremely leading edge and very innovative. We have 103 rivers in this tiny country, over 30,000 tanks, of which at least 15,000 are still in use. And finally, of course, Sri Lanka, despite its size, has over 45,000 megawatts of WWS. That's just wind, water, solar only, which we have tapped hardly anything. But I will not go into that part of it, because the energy component, I think it is being covered very well by the rest of the panel. So I will desist from talking about that in this as much as possible. Of course, you cannot, when you're talking about climate change, not to at least some extent talk about that elephant in the room. So as far as Sri Lanka is concerned, pretty much everywhere, climate is a multiplier, right? I mean, we all know that. What happens is that if there's anything bad, then that makes climate change happen, and climate change makes anything bad worse. So, in that sense, it is a multiplier. And in that sense, in Sri Lanka, what we have seen is that it threatens water. There are large scale dams and need planned development activities. There's development aggression. There are terrible land policies which actually reduce the amount of arable land and makes a lot of land fallow. In fact, in Sri Lanka, the amount of fallow land is 16.73%, and the amount of land under cultivation is just 21%. So the fallow land is comparable to the arable land, and there's a reason for that. And the reason for that is what we call the commandeering of shared commons. And we know that that is something that is very true in the South Asian region, as uh, Bhargavi said, it's the same thing. Uh, of course, the reductionist agricultural practices, the inequitable value chains, and also the tourism in this country. Tourism is very big. It's one of the bigger money earners for the country, but it is done in such an ad hoc way with such damage to the environment that it actually causes more than a little impact on the climate stability of the country. And of course, through climate change, the multiplier effects are seen. The temperature has increased, rainfall has decreased over the last 100 years. The wet zone in Sri Lanka has become actually much wetter and the dry zone drier. And I highlighted this in 2018, and the World Bank confirmed it about 3 months ago. Um, Water stress, too wet, too dry for the farming communities. And there's a decrease in the green cover total. When we started off 115 years ago with the forest department, 64.3% of the country was covered in green. With the forest department in place, we now have about 16% of the country covered in green. They say it's about 26%, but the realistic figure is closer to 16%. So there's a question amongst environmental groups. If the forest department's total output has been to ensure that the green cover has gone down from 64% to 16%, what is the point in having it? And indeed, that is a very pertinent question. We will discuss that later, perhaps if I have a little bit of time. The GHG emissions have become high, the reduction in overall ability to availability of food, uh, and the spikes in the price of foods has caused tremendous problems. And these are effects of the reduction of water for agriculture, the reduction of quality inputs to agriculture. And also, there was a little bit of a problem. Sri Lanka banned the use of agrotoxins in 2020, and without any proper plan for transition. So we ended up with lots of problems therein as well. And overall, the basic economic stress on people, especially rural communities and the urban poor, has been very high. And because of lack of adaptation, maladaptation, we are abandoning our agricultural livelihoods, and our ecosystem uh, are being damaged by the type of tourism that we go through. As we, on a daily basis, every day, this is what is happening in the country, and it is not a very healthy place because it actually uh, damages everything. Climate security is compromised, water security is compromised, food security is compromised, environment security is compromised, and taken together, national security is compromised by these threats. So it's a very tricky situation that we are living under. Next, I'm going to look at law. This is actually a backstory. The law as a facilitator of anthropogenic climate change. See, it was, I think, in AR6 that for the very first time, they mentioned colonialism as one of the causes for climate change. And that is actually true. Because what happened was with colonialism, two things happened. Number one, they first introduced laws that were alien to a country and the people of their traditional lands and their traditional resources and their traditional wealth. And on the other side, it allowed them to exploit whatever other resources in the country there were that they felt that they would want. So we have in Sri Lanka something called the Roman Dutch law, and the Roman Dutch law. There are very few, Dutch people in this country. They are very scattered and mixed, and we don't have a single Roman in the country. So this is alien to us, and this is a big problem uh, that we really have not been able to properly or adequately address ever, because what happened is when the colonists left, when the white Sahib left, he left in his place, he installed in his place the brown Sahib, who also continued the same laws and the same policies, because just as much as it was advantageous for the colonists to ravish the land, now it was advantageous for the brown Sahibs, the leaders who were left behind, to continue to be able to exploit the land own for their own advantage. In that sense, uh, Sri Lanka actually is in a very bad place. If you look at the climate vulnerability indices, Sri Lanka is second most in the most vulnerable to climate change in the world. So we are in teetering on the brink of another tragedy on top of the series of tragedies that we have had to deal with. So be very careful how we go forward. So look at this. I want to read this out to you. Our people never had laws. Instead, what we had was what we call sirith or customs. Those customs were built over thousands of years of experiment and experience. They balanced the relationship between kings, subjects, birds, beasts, trees, and flowers. They arose of the need to create harmony between all things living. Now we have laws. They are young in years and built for other types of people living in other types of societies. Most of what we call our law is not our law, it is their law. All of it is imported and none of it is important. Our people do not see the relevance of that to our society. Our people will consider laws as a last resort. And even then, even if all else fails, we may never go to the law for relief. This is because there's meanness to them, a lie to them, a manipulation in them, a debilitation within them. So we break those laws and feel no regret or guilt because we see how false they are. But, and this is very important, we will never break our custom, our sirit. To do so is worse than death, because if we break them, even in the slightest measure, we tear to pieces the very fabric of harmonious coexistence, and none of us can live after having committed such a heinous crime. And this is what our Adivasi king, Uruvariyale Vanyatto, says. He's a friend of mine. He taught me how to hunt and fish when he was 27 and I was 19. Uh, and this man probably is one of the most insightful of human beings living currently in this country with respect to what to do about development and how best development should happen in the context of this country and in relationship to what is best for the country. And so this is where we see what we call a dual system of laws that are working in this country at the moment. Two different legal systems, one based on custom and dharma, and on the other side, one based on legislature and the laws. But those laws can't really work in these types of countries, because for the laws and the rights regimes to work in this type of country, we need very strong social institutions. And in this country, we don't have that. And because of that, what happens is that anytime we try to do something where there's an agreement to do something, that agreement is being made by a very small gathering of people, and the larger, the greater population which is impacted by this really don't have much say in how those laws are created, how the policies are created, and how those policies move in practice. And because of that, there is a disconnect. there is a fracturing. And in terms of those rights, especially when it comes to the rights to land, when it comes to the right to environment, and by implication, the right to life, the larger body of people are left literally in the dustbin. They're marginalized to a very large extent. So, in that respect, if you have strong social institutions, we get right-based regimes, and they can use what we call segregated rights approaches: women, gender, youth, human rights, and so on and so forth. And they created, or they think that they can create at a global level a just society, which is want-free, guilt-free, and worry-free. But if you take countries like ours, especially like a country like Sri Lanka, the social institutions are broken. We do not have constitutional guarantees. We do not have a trust or access to legislative instruments. We do not trust and have no access to enforcement agencies. We do not trust the police. We do not trust the army. We do not trust the forest department officials, the wildlife officials, the regulators, the enforcers. We do not trust them at all. We don't have trust or have access to information. Most of the information we get is fake, and we have limited access or no access to finance. So when that happens, the rights regimes actually break apart. But the more mean problem here is the nastiness of it, is that people actually start to push these rights to people, and those rights are rights that cannot be used. They just can't be used. And in the process, what happens is that communities become fractured, and fractured communities cannot do anything to help themselves. As the previous speaker said in one of her responses to the question, nobody knows what will happen until they actually start fighting for something. And a lot of us believe that we have no ability to do that. That is because our communities have been fractured. It has been systematically taken apart. And this is where we look at the one right that is usable: community rights. And communities are the entire cloud. Whether there are people who are in the terrain, who are illegals, who are, um, I don't know, local government officials, mainstream tourism operators, environmental protectionists, socio-environmental conservationists, the birds, the bees, the clouds, the water, the rain, the mountains, the valleys. All of this is part of that community. And in the days of yore, when we had our customs, we managed to look after this, because those who use the most stand to lose the most, and they therefore will conserve the most, they will protect the most, they will guard the most, they will regenerate the most. It should never come from an external party, like, for example, myself sitting in Colombo and trying to do things for the benefit of the people in a rural community that is living in the middle of a conservation area, has less power, less capability, less knowledge, regardless of however much we study the science, than the people who have been living in those areas for centuries. And it is time that we invest our work in those very communities. So in these, we will see, sorry, I went a little bit further than I thought I would. Can I go back here? Page up. Yes. The right to ownership of shared commons, the right to non-impoverishment as opposed to poverty, access and benefit sharing, ABS, and as the previous speaker spoke, free, prior, informed consent for the IPLCs. This is not happening at the moment. Recognition as first investors, because as again in the previous speaker's presentation, she was talking about the way in which this whole thing was happening was that people were being forcibly coerced into giving up their commons. So they don't get they are not actually part of that first investor group. They are the people who have to have the highest right, not the last right, the first right. And the right to establish IPLC, like the community itself must come in and they must work together. So in that respect, what we have seen is that Sri Lanka is woefully inadequate in the way in which it should be addressing these problems and making sure that instead of all of these segregated rights, that they should have one common right called a community right and work with that for an equitable way to respond to the impacts of climate. Right. All of this has led to three things here. What we call an us versus them kind of mentality in the country. The first is we all talk about our resources and their businesses. We talk about our wealth and their development. We talk about our customs and their laws. So, in the first instance, we look at our resources and their businesses. What we are actually talking about is exploitation, right? When it comes to our wealth and their growth, it comes to what we call development aggression. And the customs versus laws, that is the foundation of most of these problems, as far as we are concerned in this country, and how they impact negatively the the aspects of response to climate change. So that us versus them mentality. I'm not going to make any kind of judgment call here because there are pros and cons to this. Most of the time, exploitation is unjust. Most of the time, what we call development aggression is unjust, and the enforcement of alien laws is unjust. But as long as we keep ourselves on these two sides and never the twain meet, I do not think, I firmly don't think, because of 15, 20 years of work in this arena, I have never seen contention working towards consensus. What we need is to be able to engage. If you do not engage the devil, you cannot cure him. And if you were to actually fight all the time, sometimes we get to a point where the fight becomes more important than the solution. And I don't think we need to go there. I don't think we can afford to go there. We need to be able to engage with each other to do that. We'll look at the water dynamics. And here, there you go, in Sri Lanka, very specifically, you can see that this very tiny country has all of these rivers emanating from what we call the heart of the country, which is the upper central watershed. But the central watershed is very small. Physically, that area is very rich, but it is very small. And after what we call the accelerated Mahaweli program that was started somewhere in the late 1970s, we created a series of dams in that area, a very large number of dams. And these dams, because they were created so quickly, did massive damage to the hydrology of the area. It destabilized the entire country. And if you look at the dam system, you can see how many such were created within the course of about 20 to 25 years. And these dams caused extreme, extreme climate related issues, and also the multiplication and the multiplier factors of climate resulted in some of these dams actually becoming very unsafe on one side and useless on the other. You can see the cascade, one after another, and the river that was actually dammed in this way literally died. And when the river dies, what happens is that the communities living in the very near vicinity are bereft of the ability to utilize water. Just a little quick idea of what types of destruction was wrought. Entire fertile regions were completely wiped out. the aging of dams and the problems associated with their security was not dealt with in line with international covenants. The siltation of large body reservoirs, now these are all actually, these four are actually interrelated. The siltation, the forced relocation, the destruction of stable farming livelihoods, and the reduction of farming space. So what happened was like very simple. It's actually the entire development strategy was myopic on one side and astigmatic on the other. So what happened was that they would create this dam and then you create a sanctuary of the areas in the immediate vicinity in the valleys. But they would not look at the catchment areas. They would say, all right, we will protect this area, but we will let the catchment areas go. So people would, because they were unable to now use the land that they had previously used, went up into the catchment areas and destroyed it. And the minute they did that, what happened was that there was massive erosion from the two sides and three sides sometimes, and all of this landed in the water. When it came into the water, we did some tests on that, and I think we found that about 25% or 30% of the carrying capacity of each of these large reservoirs created by these dams is now lost. And with climate change, what happens is now instead of having rain over a long temporal period, what we actually have now is rain falling in a very short time in very, very heavy volumes. So the minute that happens, what happens to the reservoirs is that the reservoir limits and the reservoir um, uh, levels become very high very quickly. And this causes problems for the engineers who are maintaining the dam because they see that the dam is then becoming unsafe. So they open the sluices. And when they open sluices, most of the water runs off. But beyond that, there is no rain. What happens is the sun starts to shine. And with global warming, whatever water is left evaporates. So you can see the multiplier effects of this on our water security and water availability for agriculture and other purposes. So this type of thing was never thought about. And as a result, what we have now is a series of aging dams, silted reservoirs, people who have been forced to migrate or have been actually uh, what we call constructive migration. When their livelihoods are asphyxiated, they are forced to leave. So we have what we call development refugees on one side, and on the other side, because of climate and other multipliers, refugees of environmental damage that we have done to ourselves. And this is not a very good place to be. So all this. Um, Actually, what happened is also that mining in these areas, which was actually banned, but was forcibly, like the politicians and the other big businesses went in and said, no, 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 we have to be able to do this. So they allowed them to mine. And what happened was that it destabilized the entire geography, and we started getting tremors in areas where there were large dams. And can you imagine what would happen if one of those dams fails? Because if one of those dams in the upper area fails, what we suspect, because all of the other dams were also built quickly, they are also of the same age. If one fails, then like a domino effect, every other dam is in danger of failing. And if that happens, we are going to have a disaster of a proportion that we have not had in this country before. And people have still not realized this. Okay. We go to the subcontinent now. Before we start on that, the Climate Action Network actually had its General Assembly in Colombo just 3 days ago. We finished about 3 days ago, and we came up with something called the Colombo Plan for the next 7 years. That is from 2023 to 2030. 2030 is, of course, when the three 2015 covenants are due to lapse. And in this, we created the entire sub-region came together and created, they decided to work on four pillars. The first was what we call loss and damage. The second one was youth in climate. The third is what we call just transition. And the fourth, for the first time, conservation and regeneration of natural environments. The fourth one, of course, the Climate Action Network, we tried to get it in, our colleagues tried to get it in uh, twice over the last 10 years and failed, but this time unanimously everybody agreed. And the second one was that the Climate Action Network of South Asia basically used to ring fence what they used to do to climate, but this time everyone unanimously agreed that we must work with the UNFCCC process, the SDG process, the Sendai framework, the Kunming Montreal CBD framework, the World Water Action Agenda, which was also created in February 2023, and other such covenants, because they're all integrated and interrelated. And you can't just ring fence climate and use just climate and think just climate and hope to be able to solve climate. So that was very important to us. Today, I will just talk about two things like just transition and youth in climate before I wind up. Just transition is what we're looking at. What was spoken about in the previous lecture was unjust transition, and that is something that we are fighting against. So in just transition, I will not look at the jet, that is just energy transition, because that is being covered, I think, willy-nilly by everybody else. I will talk about water, and I will talk about the other facts, especially conflict as well. Um, in this, my friends, there's something that is very important. Because of geopolitics, because of other sensibilities, what we have done is, instead of looking at ourselves as a complete, as one amorphous group, what we have done is we have kind of split this up into 10 or 11 countries. This is not a bad thing. It happens. But when we are talking climate, climate does not respect human beings' ideas of where a boundary is and where a boundary and where a jurisdiction applies. It works across. So actually, the mentality, the mindset of people who are working in climate, especially in an area like South Asia, should be to actually not look at these borders at all. If we are working about it, we can't do that. This is a very favorite. This is one of my favorite quotes. I read this when I was about 13 or 14. It changed my life forever. How do you love one's country? Is it hate for one's uncountry? People talk about it, but I like the trick of it. And this is the exact mentality that a lot of people in these areas have. We do have, despite of the fact that we talk Turkey and we talk nice things about, regional cooperation. Frankly, I have seen very little of it. I have never actually seen Nepal, Bangladesh, the mainland, working together, for example, to see how water issues can be sorted. I have not seen really any kind of dialogue, say, between India and Sri Lanka on, say, nuclear energy. We have only seen one person with a little bit more wherewithal, with a little bit more power, working with other people and trying to figure out how they can, again, re-exploit. But I think if we are going to be looking at the sub-region, and if you are going to be climate activists, climate scientists, climate advocates, we have to be able to think outside of those, what we call um, legal boundaries. We have to look at the natural systems as one amorphous blob. So having said that, at our network sessions, some of the things we talked about was the concerns. You see, we have the energy transition uh, debate going on and the energy treaties. And on the other side, we have the water issues. And water is actually the elephant in the room, actually, may be energy, but there's another elephant, is water. And what we can see here is that before all of the energy treaties can be signed, the impact on the water uh, far may come far quicker and force us to respond to that far quicker than we can respond to the energy issues, where the mitigation issues may become a little less important because of the driving urgent concern that we may not have enough water to feed all of the people. And in that sense, this is very, very dangerous, but it is something that we've been thinking for a while. Conflicts that arise from energy related development and accumulations will probably be overrun by water related development and accumulations, which means that If there is a next world conflict that may not come because of energy or energy related accumulations or growth, but because of the water issue. And in the water issue, we would not see that as a global conflict, as a world conflict, but rather every single part of the world will go into war in their micro pockets, at the very least, or in regions. And this may come far sooner than we expect. Because at this moment in time, even as I speak, we have done very little to look at the water problems in the world. In fact, the World Water Conference that was held in 2023 was the first that has been held in the last quarter century. It is only after 25 years that we had a water conference. And the water conference became very urgent, and that is why they had it. And they created something like a framework or an action agenda on how to manage our water resources. But it is, I'm almost suspecting right at this moment that it is just a little bit too little, too late. I'm not a doomsday crow or anything like that, but when I'm seeing all of the various types of pressures, tensions, and talks across all of these sectors, whether it is energy, whether it is water, whether it is war and conflict, whether it is internal migration, forced migration, whatever it is, all of these things, when you look at the entire accumulation of problems that are related to the multiplying effects of climate, especially in the South Asian region, I'm seeing that the water issue is probably going to override in every segment of the countries, of the entire region, substratums and societies, is going to override the energy issue. Rather that we have a bit more effort put into water than we have already put into energy. But we must remember that hydrosociology is very complex and it is very, very uncertain, it is very ambiguous, and therefore it requires skills in hydrology, sociology, anthropology, politics, diplomacy, all of these things to address with any degree of sustainability. And if somebody asks me, is that even possible? I would say, we'll have to we can do what we must, because if we don't, then we are actually not doing our best to curb the issues related to climate. So, in that sense, uh, possible the interventions in South Asia, we must recognize that the water problem is complex, and we have to try to be very strategic and very careful, both at the country and the regional level. And of course, advocate lobby with mainland South Asian countries to work towards resolving transboundary water conflicts. Good luck with that. It is not an easy thing to do. We have been trying for a long time, but the progress has been almost, very, very little. But we have to do that. Third, resolve inequity in water management by increasing the voice in the strategies and the plans of women, because the women are the ones who are responsible for its harvesting, for its gathering, for its collecting. Families, whether it is micro societies or communities, they are the people who do it. And if actually going to cause any positive impact on the problems that we are facing with water equity in the world, especially in South Asia also. In all of these, what we have seen is that if you look at SDG 6, uh, the IWRM progress has been almost non-existent. But this is something that we will be working on with the Climate Action Network of South Asia over the next 7 years. Control pollution, of course. And finally, youth and climate. There's a little bit of a tricky thing here because the UNFCCC defines youth as being between the ages of 18 and 35. UN is 50 to 24. But we will be, we decided that we use the 18 to 35 age group. that is so, then more than 50% of all of the actions that we have been doing is where I suspect that 90% of us are over the. And this is the same with the UN. I was speaking to the special rapporteur for youth uh, of the UNSG, and she said that 90% of the people who speak at the UN are older than 55. And this is a woeful state of affairs because I think it is the youth who are more relevant in this whole thing. And in South Asia, with a larger majority of youth, it is much more important that we bring them right to the forefront, give them the positions, and allow them to stand and take their own measure of what is going on, how to solve these problems. They may have far more relevant ways of doing things than the scientists like us, or the activists like us, or the legislators and the lawmakers like us who are older. We must make sure that, in fact, the guardians of nature are the youth, and they're rewarded for it. There is a complex mechanism for rewarding them. I will not go into it because I don't have too much time for that, but we'll be sharing all of that at the Climate Action Network very soon. And finally, create subcontinental strategies for networking youth-driven, youth-centric research, grassroots action, and advocacy. And finally, before I wind up, we all know that climate is neither a problem nor a challenge. It is actually our folly. And if we are to redress this, then at the very least, or rather as a mandatory factor, we must be completely, as our individual selves, climate neutral at the very least. Or we must go climate negative if we are really involved in this. Because if a person is not, then the person has lost the right to speak for the world and the climate. If he or she is going to engage in things that cause damage to the climate, then the person has primarily lost the right to speak for everyone. Because if he does it as an individual, then everybody else does it, there is a chance that we will be able to redress this. But if we're going to be only simply talking about this, discussing it, collating, correlating, analyzing, discussing, writing research papers, talking Turkey in or done that, put into the climate debate over the last 20, 30 years, and you look at the outcomes, we are looking at what we call microscopic gains in information bias. We're trying to project those big gains. But looking at it from a helicopter view, we will be able to very clearly see that our gains have been almost minute. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, sir, for
Right.
such an insightful session and for giving us these insights into
All
the
right.
Sri Lankan side of things. In lieu of the time constraints, sir, I would request the participants of this session to please ask their questions towards the end of the third session, or you can type in your questions within the chat box or the Q&A box, and we can take them towards the very end of the next session. So we can club the questions and take together after the next session. Thank you so much,
Okay.
sir, for
All
this
right.
session. Thank you very
Right.
much. We would like to move forward with our next speaker for the day. I would like to, I'm very delighted and I would like to welcome our next speaker, Mr. Ashish Kothari ji, to speak on the topic of eco swaraj and alternate developments towards rainbow recovery. Mr. Ashish Kothari ji is founder member Kalpavriksha Pune. Thank you for joining us today, sir. Over to you.
Thanks, Priyanka. Thanks to IMPRI for this invitation, and thanks to Bhargavi and Arjuna for laying a fantastic foundation. Some of what I say might sound like repeats, but I'm going to try and go beyond also. Just a quick question. Since Indians normally dominate these sorts of sessions, I'm very happy that Arjuna took much longer than his allotted thing. So which means I can try and cut short. I will try and do that. But what's your outer limit for the session? Because it was supposed to be 5 o'clock, right?
Sir, we can please take your time.
Yeah, okay.
Please,
all right. Okay. So now I'll do maybe about 20 minutes, and then hopefully there'll still be time for questions. Can I share screen? Yeah, okay. Priyanka, just tell me if you can see this full screen.
Yes, perfect.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I think I'm not going to focus more than a couple of minutes on the problem part, because I think both Bhargavi and Arjuna have actually, and I'm sure a lot of your previous speakers have spoken about the kinds of crises that we're in, climate being just one of them, adding to a whole set of other crises that have kind of become excuses for corporations to become that much more profit-seeking and governments to become more authoritarian, including the recent COVID pandemic, but are also occasions where the best of human spirit in terms of solidarity actions and resistance and so on, and creating creative solutions also comes out. And I think it's the second part of the human response to crises that I would actually like to focus on, because one of the most important things that I think is emerging from these crises is a challenge to the very notion of development itself, especially development in the form of unending economic growth, as previous speakers have also said. Unless we actually challenge that, unless we challenge this god of economic growth, which unfortunately almost all countries still follow, despite all the evidence of how it's making the earth collapse, unless we challenge that and look for systemic alternatives, paradigm shifts, I think we're really not going to get very far. And this is even more important because so many of our governments, including the Indian government and most others, are actually talking about solutions which are still within the framework of economic growth, development, state authoritarianism, and so on. And these have become more avenues for profit making, more avenues for state to take more power over citizens, including surveillance and things like that. We're seeing in India, for instance, and Bhargavi spoke about it, since 1991, and especially over the last few years, the systematic weakening and the dilution of environmental laws, labor laws, human rights laws, and policies and programs that were meant to be safeguarding people's interests and the interests of the environment. So the biggest question that arises to us for all of us is, are there alternatives? Are we sort of condemned to go down this pathway which the Western industrialized countries have shown us? Or do we have alternatives that emerge from our own cultural, ecological, historical, social contexts? And I'm going to speak about two, one very briefly, which is that of resistance, where we see these sorts of destructive, unsustainable, exploitative projects coming in, including the kinds that Bhargavi spoke about, or the dams that Arjuna spoke about. We also see, in many of these cases, movements of resistance, where communities are saying enough is enough. We don't want these. And not just that we don't want these in our own backyard, but that we don't want them anywhere, because it's not just injustice to us, it's injustice to other people and injustice to the earth. This particular picture from 30 years back is of Adivasi movement in central India against two mega hydroelectricity projects, which would have displaced 300 villages and drowned out all the wonderful forests that you see behind. And they were saying not just that we don't want this dam because of the displacement and so on, but also because the river, which you think of as for exploitation for creating electricity, for us, this river is our mother. It is what has given us life, and we won't allow it to be bound and shackled by your dreams of progress. Whether you see the farmers' movement in India, the climate justice movements, the youth art movements across the South Asian region, these are actually movements of resistance that are not just saying no to something, but also showing different ways of relating to the rest of nature, relating to each other as human beings. But along with resistance and saying no, we're also coming up, communities and people and civil society organizations and even some governments are coming up with creative alternative solutions to people's needs. There are needs for basic services like water and food and energy and housing and so on. And beyond that, the need for more democratic space and voice, for more gender justice and things like that. So we are actually seeing a flourishing of these across the South Asian subcontinent, still very marginal, still heavily threatened, still not fully challenging the macro picture, but nevertheless emerging as very significant signs of hope. Let me just quickly talk about 4 or 5 of these to give you a glimpse of what's happening. For me, this is the most inspiring one in India because it comes from the most exploited and marginalized section of India's society, or Hindu society, especially the so-called outcasts or Dalits, women in a heavily patriarchal society, and also very small landholders. And over the last 35 years or so, through women's collectives in about 75 villages and then a federation of these, they have revived their traditional biologically diverse, climate resilient agriculture. They have opposed genetically modified organisms and hybrids, opposed all kinds of chemicals, pesticides and fertilizers, fought for land rights for women, and a whole bunch of other actions through which they've created not just food security for households which were once facing hunger and malnutrition, but also what they call food sovereignty, which is to say complete control over everything to do with food, the seeds, the land, the water, the knowledge, and so on. And this, if anything, is really a model of what climate resilient agriculture could look like, not what the government of India is promoting, not even what the FAO is promoting in terms of climate smart agriculture. The similar movement in Bangladesh called the Naya Krishi Andolan, with thousands of farmers. In central India, another different context, this is Adivasi India, or indigenous peoples, where after a very interesting single village rebellion in the 1970s and 80s, created this slogan which you see at the bottom of the slide, that while we elect the government in Mumbai and New Delhi, in our village, we are the government. We are the ones who will take all decisions. We now have a federation of 90 village assemblies attempting this kind of self-rule, self-governance, the protection of forests, the revival of organic farming, much more empowerment of the women, and trying to bring back sort of local culture and language, even as they learn from the outside. We see across the South Asian subcontinent, what is called community conserved areas or territories of life, where people are sustaining their traditional protection of ecosystems or creating new forms of protecting them. These are wetlands, rivers, mountains, forests, deserts, coasts, all kinds of different ecosystems where people are saying, it's not for the governments to protect this, it is for us. And we will claim back control over these and protect them because they're also crucial for our livelihoods and because of our ethical notions of why nature should be protected. We moved to a village in Western India, the driest part of India, which has created water self-security and self-sovereignty, but also a fantastic initiative at dealing with, for instance, the COVID pandemic through community health systems, sustaining their economic livelihoods through the whole COVID pandemic, even when the government of India had imposed a very devastating economic lockdown, and many other things, their own women's assembly, young girls assembly, and a whole bunch of other transformations that you see there, including moving towards responding to the climate crisis. In terms of energy, Bhargavi's already mentioned this, but we do have examples of really genuine energy alternatives, not the mega solar and wind projects that she spoke about, but others. For instance, in Delhi, many schools, including government schools, putting up solar rooftops, by which they're becoming self-reliant with energy, but also actually saving money because they're not buying power from the grid. Bhargavi mentioned Kusum already. Also, the very important aspect of not having to create more and more energy, but also thinking of how could architecture be changed so that you actually need less energy. If you look at our buildings and cities today, they are the most stupidly energy guzzling buildings that you can think of, the new ones. But there's both in traditional and modern architecture, there are alternatives by which you can actually use the sun and the wind in order to not actually have so much electricity being used. And so therefore also the whole issue of curbing luxury demand, because if India's energy demand keeps going higher and higher, no amount of so-called renewable energy is actually renewable and sustainable. In these last 3 years, one of the exercises we did was to look at where communities, including the ones I've given examples of, were more resilient in the COVID pandemic, both to health crises and the economic crisis. And to us, it seems like there's a whole series of lessons one can learn from these initiatives, not just for COVID, but for all kinds of crises. These lessons include, for instance, the sustaining or the rebuilding of community spirit. How do people work with each other in solidarity? Which also, of course, means challenging local inequalities, patriarchy, casteism, and so on. The lessons included the rights of communities. Arjuna spoke about those rights of communities to their productive ecosystems and their means of production, not controlled by government agencies or by private corporations. These lessons included the ability of communities, both in rural and urban areas, to take decisions for themselves, not have decisions taken by the state for them. And that is, of course, the spirit of the Indian Constitution also. It also showed the enormous importance of not depending for basic needs like water and housing and energy, etc., on systems that are very far away or on systems that are inefficient and corrupt like the government. So how does one create much more self-reliance for these sorts of basic needs? It showed that where you have to have economic exchanges, the more you localize these exchanges, for instance, creating relationships between producers and consumers in a localized area, the more resilient they are to crises. It showed that the more one is responsible towards the rest of nature, protecting one's forest systems, river systems, wetlands, etc., the more resilient again one is to crises. And finally, it showed that there is a crucial role of the state, at least in the short run, for providing assistance with things like adaptation and mitigation. Most communities who are facing the climate crisis are not able to deal with them by themselves, or they take a long time to do it with things like water and so on. And so there is a role for the state in providing that kind of help. Now, if you take these sorts of examples and many others into account, what we see is that the kind of systemic shifts, the paradigm shifts that we need are along five spheres of life: the political, the economic, the social, the cultural, and the ecological. This is a bit of an artificial separation, but just for understanding, and the intersections amongst them. So, for instance, when we talk about politics, it's not just about bringing the right party into power. To my mind, that's completely the wrong approach we've been taken. It's really about how do we claim power where we are, as rural and urban communities, as collectives. Power is something that's inborn in us. Why are we willingly giving it over to a politician or to a bureaucrat? It's about creating the control of the local communities on the most important means of production. For instance, the Dalit women claiming food sovereignty, complete control over the earth, the land, and the seeds, and so on, or workers in an industry claiming rights over their means of production, their tools of production. It's about creating the economy of caring and sharing, not about financial markets, but actually underlying that. What is it? I mean, for instance, women's invisibilized role in the economy for caring for grandparents or caring for children, right? How do we recognize that and respect that? It's about dealing with inequalities in society, creating social well-being through also creating the possibility of everybody having access to decision-making, access to benefits, etc. It's about sustaining the incredible diversity of cultures and knowledge that we have in the subcontinent, right? 780 languages in India alone, and if you take all the other countries, probably many, many more different forms of knowledge. Which are crucial to dealing with the climate crisis. Just as an example, in Himachal Pradesh in northern India, according to the fantastic exercise done a few years back called the People's Linguistic Survey of India, there are 230 different words for snow, which hide an incredible amount of detailed, nuanced, specific knowledge about different conditions of winter across Himachal Pradesh. If we were to teach only in Hindi across Himachal Pradesh schools, we would actually wipe out a lot of this knowledge, which is in the local languages, not in Hindi. And of course, it's also about ecological resilience. Going quickly to how you put these together, we actually come to something that Arjuna also spoke about, which is how does one look at, for instance, South Asia beyond the nation state boundaries, which are kind of cutting rivers, cutting mountain ranges, cutting even cultures, cutting nomadic populations, cutting wildlife migratory routes. How do we reimagine it and then start working towards either a borderless South Asia or at least much more porous boundaries and borders so that these flows can be reconnected, because they are so very crucial to, again, dealing with climate and other crises. How do we reintegrate ourselves within nature? We have, because of this whole Western industrialized way of thinking, we've kind of separated ourselves. We talk about humans and nature rather than humans and the rest of nature. How do we actually think of the fact that it's not just human rights, but the rights of all of nature that are important? Now, putting all this together, something that's emerging from within some of the Indian contexts is what we call eco-Swaraj. Swaraj, of course, as many of you know, is an old notion, which is, I think, prevalent both in India, but also in Sri Lanka, if I'm not mistaken, Arjuna, is about having local autonomy, decision-making power, self-determination, and freedom, but with responsibility for the autonomy, freedom, and happiness of other people and the rest of nature. That kind of shifts the paradigm of democracy considerably and shifts the paradigm of economy also considerably. And there are, of course, similar notions in all other parts of the world. Last question, and then I'll talk about a little bit about the process that we use in a few minutes. This question that arises is that there might be hundreds and thousands of examples of this kind of positive transformation, but then how do you, they're mostly small or scattered. Even if they're large, they're not connected with each other. How do you make the macro shifts? How do you achieve at scale? And I think one very important thing is that connecting movements of resistance, which are saying no and stopping the bulldozer of so-called development, and the constructive alternatives coming together, enabling the voices of those most marginalized and who are the sort of biggest so-called victims of the climate and other crises. Doing collective visioning, dreaming of what kind of future we want, and then walking our paths towards that. Fighting for policy shifts in the government, which I'll deal with in the next slide. And doing what I call outscaling, not upscaling. Upscaling is that corporate model, something successfully become bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Even many NGOs go in that direction. What I'm talking about is you have a Deccan Development Society, you have a Korchi Mahagram Sabha, you have a Naya Krishi Andolan. What can one learn from them in terms of lessons, policies, ethics, and then apply them in our own context with modifications, and then network, create the horizontal networks to actually make scale happen. And there are 2 or 3 things that we're trying to do to make that work. One is initiative for India, and we're hoping that this can expand also to South Asia with enough fantastic participation of people like Arjuna and others. Vikalp Sangam, or confluence of alternatives. These are not conferences, these are actually gatherings and documentation of initiatives, having people who are working in different spheres of life across different geographies and cultures coming together, documenting their stories. This website has about 2,000 stories of positive change across different parts of India. Creating forums where people can learn from each other about how to create dignified livelihoods, how to solve problems that they have, learning from others who have already solved them, such as this forum we started during the pandemic, Vikalp Sutra, and also advocating for policy shifts. So, for instance, much more budgets for climate adaptation. The recent Indian budget is abysmal in terms of what money has given for adaptation, even though millions of people are already suffering from climate crises. Supporting actual self-reliance, not the kind that the Modi government has been talking about, which is about more coal mining and so on, but actually supporting communities that are trying to become self-sufficient with basic needs. Creating livelihoods that are not in heavy industrialized sectors, but actually decentralized, local, small-scale manufacturing, reviving the incredible diversity of crafts in India, which possibly can provide 150 to 200 million jobs, good jobs. Just transition, which Arjuna spoke about, much more direct democracy powers to local assemblies, shifting away from the big industry focus to the small scale, as I mentioned already, enabling much more localized exchanges, which are, as I said, much more resilient to climate and other shocks, and putting the regeneration and the conservation of nature at the very core of all policies. So just a quick image here of similar things happening across the world. It's not just in the Indian subcontinent that this is happening, but actually fantastic solutions coming up from across the world, still scattered, still small, but nevertheless providing us really grounded signs of hope. And similar to Vikalp Sangam in India, we recently initiated in 2019 a global tapestry trying to bring these different movements across the world together to learn, to collaborate, to create more of a critical mass for affecting shifts even at the global level, even as people work at their own local in their own context. Two books that might be interesting, and I'll put the links in the chat to all the material I've spoken about. The book on the left-hand side is a attempt at envisioning India in 2100 in all sorts of different spheres: education, health, Adivasis, pastoralism, etc., by 40 different authors, and then coming down to the present and saying, how do we get to that kind of an ideal future? And the one on the right is 100 examples of radical alternatives already taking place in different parts of the world. So with that, and these are websites, and we can share this this presentation with all the participants later if necessary. With that, I'll end, and I hope I've contributed a little more, building on what my previous speakers already spoke about. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. It was a very informative session and lots of thought-provoking topics, I must say. Uh, as sir mentioned, that the floor is now open for questioning. Participants, whoever wants to question, can type their questions in the chat box. You can use the Q&A box, raise your hand, and unmute yourself as well. We'll be taking questions for both these sessions, Mr. Arjuna sir's session as well, and Mr. Ashish sir's session. So we'll give a couple of minutes so people can put in their questions, if that's okay. Yes, sure, sir. So in the meanwhile, I had a couple of questions from uh, firstly from Mr. Arjuna sir. I had a question. You mentioned about the hydro development projects in Sri Lanka and a large number of projects. So, sir, I wanted to know what's the current state regarding developing a hydro project there. Like, what law, what all situations are being considered, if they are being given any considerations regarding the local communities, or about all the issues that we spoke up about the aging hydro development projects. Are the new projects are they being remedied in some sort of way, or is it still going on the previous track only?
Priyanka, at the moment, there is very little being done in terms of addressing the very pressing issues of managing the development projects beyond the project life cycle, because they're looking at it only in a very short-term way and thinking, all right, if I put this hydropower project here, I'm going to generate 50 megawatts. This is all they're thinking. They're not thinking about the sustainability, and most of the time they bypass it. Sri Lanka's environmental laws are very strong, but when the laws and the policies get into practice, they are the weakest in the subcontinent. What happens is that, for example, if we have to do an EIA, which is an environmental impact assessment, they will bypass that by saying, okay, we will do an IEE, which is an initial environmental assessment or something like that. So what happens is that that is very much more forgiving, and it can allow you to command the other comments just as much as, for example, they will say they can bypass some of the critical checks and balances and go through just as much as they say, like as people will go and go to the liquor store and get the men folk to sign their lands away. Similarly, in Sri Lanka, they will go and try to enforce themselves on the people in strategic ways and get away with it scot-free. It is happening even now. So one of the big advocacy and attack logics that we are going to have is to try to completely change this. It cannot be done. It has to be multi-pronged. It has to be, first of all, community driven. The community must first stand up for themselves. The community has lost the art of negotiation, of diplomacy, of selective aggression when it is required, and also the knowledge and the science. Whether it is citizen science or whether it is mainstream science, they have to be able to state their case with sufficient, substantiated evidence, which they don't know how to do. So one of the key issues here is not to try to like trundle over it all and try to go and contend with the government directly, but to have strategic multi-pronged thrusts to address this grievance, address the wrong, and ensure that the people in the areas that are being most affected have the most say. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. That was really helpful. Uh, as Mr. Ashish, sir, I have a few questions from your session as well, if I could take them up.
Yeah, sure.
Uh, so, sir, you initially mentioned about climate resilient agriculture. And I wanted to understand a bit more about climate resilient agriculture since you said that it's a bit different from what the government portrays it to be. And especially what sort of interested me was resisting the GMO crops. I think you mentioned, maybe I heard it incorrect also, not very informed about it. Could you put it in that perspective? Because I thought that genetically modified crops were supposed to be something that would help better sort of develop resilience against the climate changes going on. So could you put that into perspective a bit? And then I had another question about you mentioned lastly about substantial budgets being assigned for climate adaptation. I wanted to know from you few things if you could list as what would come under the climate adaptation categories, like few examples if you could share where the budgets could be better spent. That and lastly, the nature at the core of policies, as you said. So, like if we consider hydro development projects, like in states like Himachal or let's say Uttarakhand, uh, so the river has a, as you said, that we must consider that the river has a right to flow as well, just like we have our rights, the nature has its own rights as well. The flow of the river, from what I know, there's just this environment, e-flows are, I think, the least criteria being considered right now when we are thinking of developing a hydro development project. So one side there's so much influx of information about this hydro development projects being a good resource for renewable energy, and they're being pitched as a very essential form, necessary, good for India to attain its SDG goals as well and everything. And then alongside it, there's just this bare minimum e-flows criteria. Uh, but there are more and more hydro projects being pitched in. How can we put nature at the core of policies? Let's just say even just for if you're saying the hydro development projects in itself also, like regarding their development and everything. So these are my three questions. So
Okay, thanks, Priyanka. I'll try and answer them briefly, given we're running out of time. So climate resilient agriculture, and what I said, and looking at, for instance, the example of the Dalit women farmers in Telangana, firstly, it's very important to recognize that agriculture is not just a technological system, right? It encompasses society, culture, ecology, economics, etc. And so when, for instance, those Dalit women farmers say that our agriculture is climate resilient, they're talking about the fact that it is not just friendly to the earth, and sustains agricultural biodiversity. It's not monocultures, and there's no chemicals being used, so it's not poisoning the earth, it's not poisoning food and water, etc. But also that we are in control, that it is the small farmer which comprises most of the farmers of the world, right? It is the small farmer which is actually benefiting and in control of that agriculture. What our governments, and even with the UN and all of that that's being pushed, is what's called climate smart agriculture, where a lot of the focus is on sophisticated technologies. You may have noticed in the previous budget, for instance, the Indian government announced drones which can help farmers to figure out, issues of weather patterns and things like that, or other sophisticated technologies, which some of which may or may not be useful. I'm not saying they're all completely useless, but they are in control of the big corporations or the governments, which means farmers become totally dependent on them. And if suddenly, for instance, tomorrow the drone fails or something else fails, there is no fallback mechanism for the farmer, unlike where they have their own systems intact. So climate resilient agriculture could be a short way of saying climate and community and society and culture and blah, 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 resilient and friendly agriculture, whereas this climate smart and all those buzzwords coming in the climate negotiations are not. And this includes GMOs, because many issues with GMOs, but one of the biggest issues, apart from all the ecological and safety issues, to me, probably the biggest issue is, again, that there is no control by farmers. You are totally dependent on corporations that are producing those GMOs. Today they're there, tomorrow they may not be there. And GMOs also are known to, of course, collapse after, like hybrids, collapse after a point in time. So yes, climate resilient agriculture does not have space for GMOs, for corporate seeds, etc. And the second question about adaptation. So, for instance, I mean, I was recently in Ladakh, and Ladakhi villages are facing a very serious crisis with regard to the recession of glaciers, which was their only source of water across many parts of Ladakh, and it's very difficult for them to deal with it. How do they? They can't recreate those glaciers on their own. So many of them are migrating down. There's actually climate displacement that is taking place right now, not just in Ladakh, but in many parts of the Himalaya. Similarly, coastal areas where water is rising, people are having to actually move in. These are the situations where the government actually has the resources to be able to help the communities, for instance, either to put another pipeline further up or to create other water solutions. Some of the NGOs in Ladakh have actually shown those solutions, or in the case of coastal things, to actually help with that movement and help create livelihoods where they have to move further inland. These are just two examples of many, many, many. The other is heat stress. One of the biggest problems with regard to climate is heat. People who are working on the streets, vendors, street cleaners, police constables, traffic constables, they are suffering enormously. And so far, only I think one or two cities, Ahmedabad as an example, actually has a heat stress action plan. I don't know how good or bad it is. I'm not a climate expert. But we need that kind of government um, action to create the possibilities of people who have to deal with heat in the most vulnerable situations to be able to be a little bit more comfortable, or at least a little less uncomfortable, right? And especially the heat-related deaths and illnesses that we're talking about. So these are just a few examples of what could be the specific elements of a much greater budgetary allocation on climate adaptation. On your third question of nature at the core, 2 points here. Hydroelectricity dams across the Himalaya are a recipe for disaster, very similar to what Arjuna was saying with Sri Lanka, but in the Himalaya, as you can imagine, with the fragility of the Himalaya, it's even more so. And they are not big NOT climate solutions, not at all. Big dams are in no way climate solutions. Firstly, they create that enormous damage and destruction and change courses of rivers, etc. But also they create reservoirs, which themselves are sources of greenhouse gases. So they are not solutions. That's one of the fake things that the government of India is promoting, saying we are moving towards 50%, what is it called, fossil fuel energy by 2030. A lot of that 50% is big hydro, which is not climate friendly, which is not ecologically friendly, and which is not people friendly. It's only profit making friendly, as far as we can make out. So one is we have to challenge that narrative that actually that's for climate. The second thing is in terms of e-flows. You very rightly said e-flows are actually the bare minimum which do not account for all the diverse, multiple, complex ecological functions of a river. It does not account for all the species that are dependent on those multiple functions. It does not account for the dependence of riverine human communities on that river. I don't know who dreams up these e-flows, but they do not actually take into account all of this. If all of this had to be taken into account, you would have to go towards allowing the river to remain free flowing. That is the only ecologically and climate friendly way of dealing with rivers, which doesn't mean that there aren't other ways of producing the electricity. There are, as we have shown, right? So really, I think if one is talking about climate and rivers, and Arjuna spoke about water as being absolutely core, I agree with him. We have to take a much more ecologically intelligent and wise approach, which communities themselves can tell us about, because they've been living with these rivers for millennia, right? But it's these guys sitting in New Delhi or Colombo or wherever who tend to think that they know everything that is to be known about rivers, and that these e-flows will solve all the problems. It's actually utter nonsense. I'm sorry to have to speak so frankly, but we have to say that, and we have to expose why that is the case. Thanks.
Thank you so much, sir. That really answered all my questions. We have another question from Astaba Jadeja ji. If you would like to unmute and ask your question.
Yes, my question was to Ashish sir, and my question is regarding accountability of both the state and the corporates. Because on a personal level, you can go as sustainable as you want to, but as long as the corporates and the state do not take into consideration actual sustainability, it's a very difficult thing to achieve. And also, when we think about accountability, repealing any dangerous project is one thing, but where does the real accountability come from? Are there any channels or any examples to show that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, again, we would need much more time for me to give a proper nuanced answer to this, and I'm sure Arjuna and Bhargavi also have things to say. See, I think one very important thing to realize is that as long as governments and corporates behave in a way that they want to sustain not the earth and not people, but their own power and their profits, there is no way that actually they will show accountability. The only way this can happen is through strong people's movements, saying, look, the government is accountable, the people have elected the government, it is accountable to making sure people are not suffering, at the least, right? Which means, for instance, if there is a climate crisis that's affecting tens of millions of people in the ways that I just mentioned, the government is accountable to making sure that that suffering is reduced, that it is addressed by putting the budgets and the people and whatever is needed into place, and generating large scale civil society response also, which would alleviate that suffering. That is what accountability would be at a very simple level. You can then go beyond that and say the governments are also accountable to, let's say, the constitutions of our countries, which talk about equality. So the governments are accountable to actually making sure there's gender equality. We see what's happening in India now is completely the reverse. The governments are accountable to making sure that all religious faiths are respected. We see completely the reverse that's happening right now, right? So um, and with corporations, I mean, I don't know what to say. We've just been hearing all the scandals with regard to Adani and Reliance and so on and so forth. There is no accountability, but you can't expect them to actually suddenly overnight become accountable. You have to be able to address them, challenge them, say this is what we want in terms of accountability, and build the people's power to do that. Also negotiate. I agree with Arjuna that it's not just about all the time confronting. When confrontation is needed, we should do that, but sometimes also actually saying, look, here's how you can do it, here's how you can actually create climate resilient agriculture, not the way you're talking about. So these are, and some states in India, for instance, are responding. Andhra Pradesh, Sikkim, they're actually responding saying, yeah, okay, this seems to be the right way to go, we will support these sorts of things. I mean, there are problems there, but nevertheless, at least thinking has changed. So that dual thing of struggling, fighting, resisting, confronting, with also negotiations and suggesting positive, constructive alternatives. This is how we could increase the accountability of governments and businesses. As regard big corporates, well, my own view is that we need to demolish the big corporates. I don't think there's any way of making them accountable. But okay, in the meanwhile, you keep telling them, why do you produce so much plastic? Or like, for instance, the waste pickers in Pune have addressed Procter and Gamble and a number of the other big multinational corporations who produce enormous amounts of waste, saying, why are you producing so much waste? Why can't you actually package your products in a much more ecologically friendly thing? So, that's one way of also addressing corporates until they exist. eventually I hope they disappear, at least the big ones, because all businesses can actually be run by workers. Producer companies, producer cooperatives. There is no reason why we need these big capitalist corporations to produce what we need.
Thank you so much, sir. Uh, Arjuna sir has raised his hand. If you'd like to go forward, sir.
Yes, just an observation actually. Three things. Uh, you mentioned, Ashish, the Deccan Development Society. I have spent literally weeks and weeks with them, with the Dalit communities in Hyderabad, and I was so happy that you mentioned them. And those women there are absolutely formidable. And one of the things they taught me, and you said something about we have to learn from these people because they are so, and we are like, as you know, we are scientists and various types of researchers and advocates and activists, but the people on the ground, they really know what is going on, and they engage with it every single day. And these women, when I was working, I mean, was there with them, immersed in their culture, they said something about working with each other as a very distinct, different thing to working together. What they were saying was working together is a Western thing. That is equality mission. We know that our men and women and youth and children are not equal, they're different. But we make sure that the dynamics and the strengths of each works in intermeshed form with the dynamics and strengths of every other person to create this cohesive community that is not easily broken. And so I said, thank you for telling me that. I wasn't thinking of it in that way. This was like 15 years ago. And also, they had something when it comes to engaging with the private sector, engaging with the aggressors, if you want to call them that. They had something called Prajatirhu, the People's Court. They created the court and they brought these people, the corporate entities who were creating BT cotton, who were creating BT rice, and the others who were doing what you call black businesses, and they called them into question and they got them to give evidence as to why they were doing what they were doing, and they delivered a verdict on that. And once that verdict was actually created, it was almost like full court because there were ex-judges and so on and so forth on that panel. And so when their reports come out, they have far more credibility in the way in which it can be used to advocate for changes. So I saw that as being something very, very good. And then those women said, we learned something from you as well. I said, you would have learned nothing from me. I'm only a researcher. And they said, no, actually we did because you have a bigger ecological niche. I said, what do you mean? And they said, your heart is Carnatic, your head is Hindustani, and your voice is Western. So he said, you need all of that to be able to engage with a person who you do not know. And I said, well, thank you very much. I didn't think of it this way. But those are the types of people that whose experiences, whose insights, whose knowledge is relevant not only to that small community out there in Hyderabad, but to every single such community anywhere in South Asia. And the problem that we have is that we don't have that interconnect, that network to be able to make sure that this becomes a South Asian voice. Because if we allow them to do it, allow them to network, then the South Asian voice from the communities of South Asia, we are all the same, would be much more powerful, much more relevant, and much more impactful in changing the order of things. And as you said, Ashish, at the end of the day, the large corporations can be dismantled. We know that there is a better world that we can create, a juster society, but the preventive factors right at the top of them is the corporate greed. So we have to be able to make sure that at some point, sooner rather than later, that we wipe out this misery, as we call it, of the corporate entity and its business logic. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Uh, Ashish, sir, please go ahead. do you want to say something?
No, sorry. I was going to just applaud what Arjuna said. By mistake, I put up my hand.
I should. Meanwhile, let me also take this opportunity to ask one question, rather two. So one was that all the countries of South Asia, on the global stage, too many reports and other things are also now going to 2070 as net zero. But there is a jubilant mood among the government and in all the things. How do you see that? Because all the things which we are reporting, things appears to be fine at that level, and at some places we are also showcasing that we are leading in this. For example, our Prime Minister for the International Solar Alliance, or be it many other things. So how do you see uh, this kind of awareness also being imparted by our states? And second, for the corporate one, Ashish sir raised so many of pertinent issues, and especially we wanted sir's experience to be here so that we all can learn. So now there is something called ESG and green investment. For example, all the new investment by all the big houses, be it in Hyderabad or in Deccan areas, or be it any other areas, are now green compliant, or there is ESG. How do you see all this new jargons coming in, and what is going on the ground to both of you? In fact, Bhargavi ma'am can also add. She was also mentioning some example of Bengaluru. So how do we see these two phenomena happening as we discuss these things? Anyone can go.
Bhargavi, you want to go first?
Yeah.
No, you could go. Thank you.
Arjuna?
You go ahead. You go ahead, Ashish. You go ahead.
Okay, I just a quick one, and I'm sure there'll be many things that you two can add. So I think this whole so-called jubilant mood is jubilant because of the fact that the global society and by global society, I don't mean a lot of civil society, okay, who are extremely skeptical of what the South Asian countries are talking about, the South Asian country heads are talking about. But if you look at, whether you take the US president or you take the French president or whatever, the sorts of people they kind of look up to, saying, okay, these guys are applauding us. That's why there's a jubilant mood, right? So, and if India can show that we are actually rapidly moving towards that half of our energy needs will be, or electricity needs will be met by so-called clean or non-fossil fuel sources, then everybody in that kind of sector is applauding. And that's where they live, right? So they don't actually if they were to actually go to the communities who are displaced by some of those solar projects, as Bhargavi spoke about, if they were actually to go to the towns which are collapsing in across the Himalaya right now, first was Joshimath, now you're seeing it's happening in Mandi and others. Has our Prime Minister actually visited those places? If he did, he would actually see the mood on the ground, which is not jubilant at all. If he was to go to Ladakh, where pastoralists are being displaced, and if there was any way of by which they could ask wildlife about the solar project, the 20 gigawatt solar project coming up in Ladakh, in one of the most ecologically fragile areas of the country, I don't think they would see jubilance. But they are in that cloud, and of course that cloud is powerful. It's a cloud which is also supported by all the big corporations, etc. So there is that thing. But if you really look at it on the ground, this net zero 2070, the green investments, a couple of my colleagues did a very detailed critique of green investments, which you might have seen, is really about mostly greenwashing. It's about how to sustain the profits of corporations and the power of governments rather than sustain the earth. Unfortunately, a lot of civil society and a lot of the media is bought over and applauds all of this. And there's a handful of us who actually are left to challenge it, to expose the problems with it, and to say what really are genuine alternatives. So, which is not to say there's nothing good in this. I'm sure there'll be some good stuff in the green investments. There'll be some good stuff in the renewable energy projects they're doing, especially the more decentralized ones. But overall, the picture is actually one of really of greenwashing what is continued corporate and state profit making and authoritarianism. So that's a short answer, Arjun, but I'm sure there's a lot more that can be added. But Bhargavi and Arjuna, you can add.
I think
By the
you.
way, a lot of the net zero, sorry, but a lot of the net zero is also based on currently unproved technologies.
Mm.
So yeah, they're just saying that okay, by then those technologies would have developed for us to capture the carbon and put it in the ground or wherever, or we will have made enough afforestation to make it happen. So a lot of it is actually literally up in the air. But by 2070, these guys are not going to be there anymore. So if we miss that target, who is to be blamed? Who is to be caught? You know, Mr. Modi doesn't even have descendants. So, so who do we actually catch when in 2070 we're still in stuck in a huge mess? So it's nice to be able to make these promises.
Okay, thank you. Bhargavi ma'am, would you like to go on?
No, I just wanted to say, Ashish summed it up so beautifully. Yeah.
Arjun Aji?
Dr. Archon, yes, you know what? Something that Bhargavi said earlier. The thing that we can actually applaud is micro transitions, not at the level of corporate. If you do it at the large level, the payoff is never going to be green. The payoff is going to be negative. We are going to, when we audit it, we will see that the overall damage that is done in that transition is going to be far greater than the gains that we have because of the transition. So the justness of that transition is a very important factor. From a Sri Lankan perspective, when we looked at the horror that was happening in certain parts of India, we were we are in a little bit of a different place because we haven't actually got into that yet. We have other problems to deal with right now, so energy and so on. These are things that are like, still they are, importing oil, and they have no clue about how to tap the renewable energies of the country with decentralized mechanisms and so on and so forth. So before we go down that road, we look at mm, some of the mistakes that we see sometimes that were done in India, and we see, okay, guys, we'll have to, like, we were actually working with our CSO partners in India and try to figure out how we can do something here before we'll get into this, but before they get into that, to make sure that the status quo is established where we do not get into transition at the cost of the people. So, in that sense, I think the big fight in this country is for micro transitions, not for large scale transitions, and to decentralize the grid, because at the moment the grid is actually optimized for coal and it is centralized. And that is why the energy lobby is, and they're trying to keep it that way. So the fight is to decentralize it and to make sure that the micro transitions are actually going to be active. Because if you look at rooftop solar, for example, this whole thing, rooftop solar does not compromise the land. It does not compromise the way in which people's livelihoods work, and it actually helps them. Rooftop solar in this country is about 25,000 megawatts. That's the total potential. It can be reasonably and easily and cheaply tapped. And that is the big fight that we have on our hands right now when it comes to energy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. So we can take one more question before the final remarks. Mansi ji has a question. Mansi ji, can you unmute and ask your question?
Uh, so I want to ask, like, in the lieu of climate change that is taking place, particularly in Sri Lanka, how like food sovereignty is ensured and the food security to the people of all this status.
Actually, COVID was a very good thing for us in terms of food sovereignty. It damaged the security aspects a little bit, but that was actually neutralized by the food sovereignty issues, because with COVID and then with the economic meltdown, the people did not have enough money to go to the market. And in the market, we were actually using only about 40 or 50 different types of vegetables, which is all we had, and about 10 or 15 types of fish and meats. But the minute that we could not afford to go to the market and buy, we started to do what we used to do earlier, which is to harvest from the home garden, harvest from the village, harvest from the area, and suddenly our food pattern changed, and became more diverse, became more nutritious, because most of what they ate then was something that was not toxin related. It wasn't grown with toxins. So actually, the health improved amongst the rural community, and the health issues that they had were better treated because of the food consumption pattern changes. So that was very good for us. But human beings, desires and habits die hard. The minute that it changes, the minute that you get back to the same place where yeah, okay, now we can go to the market because we have money, they will stop their good habit, which was an enforced habit at this moment in time, and go back to the bad habit. So the big problem for us was not to change, was actually not to try to push them towards a good habit, but to prevent them from sliding back to the bad habit. Things are looking much better in rural communities. However, the issue with urban poor is very, very disastrous, because they don't grow anything and they don't have any money, which means literally overnight they are in starvation situations. And you can't actually give sovereignty, you just have to give them something to eat at the moment. And that is something that the government and the process mechanisms have not addressed adequately at the moment. It's an ongoing process. We are part of the food security network, which is working directly with the government. And hopefully, over the next 3 months, we will do something about it. At this moment in time, we are really worried about what's going to happen in 3 months, because with the ENSO teleconnects, El Nino, as well as the Indian Ocean Dipole, both of these have actually impacted at the same time. And because of that impact, Sri Lanka is currently frying, which means that the monsoons are late. The drought is extremely, now it has gone to 7 months. So food availability, both for the rural communities as well as for the, certainly for the urban communities, is going to be a big question mark. So these are things that can change dramatically because of the volatility of our situations. Climate change is so bad that we cannot actually predict some of these things. The complexity, the ambiguity, the uncertainty is so high that if I were to tell you, hey, everything is fine, everything is, I wouldn't say that, because I know that if I say that, I will have to eat my words 3 months down the road. It's tricky. There's no easy answer. Can we do this? Will we do this? We can try. I would say very safely, we can try and we can fight our best battle, but sometimes we may lose in certain areas. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, sir. I would now like to proceed. We do not have any other questions, I see. I would now like to proceed with the formal vote of thanks for this session. As we come to the end of day 4 of understanding the nuances of climate change in the Indian subcontinent, impact and way forward, an online international monsoon school program, a 6-week immersive online introductory certificate training course organized by IMPRI. I, Priyanka Negi, researcher at IMPRI Impact and Policy Research Institute, would like to propose the formal vote of thanks on behalf of the IMPRI Center for Environment, Climate Change and Sustainable Development, New Delhi. We are grateful to our experts for the day 4 sessions, Ms. Bhargavi S. Rao ji, Mr. Arjuna Senaviratne ji, and Mr. Ashish Kothari ji, for taking out their valuable time and for their thought-provoking insights on the topics. Not just that, for giving us their time, for engaging with us in such meaningful discussions. These are very pertinent topics. This was a very different session than the all of the sessions that we have had so far. And we would like to thank you immensely for engaging in this super important discussion with us. We would also like to thank all of our participants who have raised their questions and actively participate in today's deliberations. Readings for the session have been shared in your email. Mr. Ashish sir has shared some very important links with us in the chat. We'll be sharing those with you as well. And the video of the session will also be shared with you for the learning. We look forward to welcoming everyone for our 5th day of the certification course on 2nd September at 3 p.m. The theme for day 5 is alternative energy solutions, and the experts are Dr. Aditya Gusai ji, Mr. Srinivas Krishna Swami ji, and Mr. Deependra Pauril ji. We are grateful if you're watching us later on YouTube or listening to us on our various podcasts or reading our publications. We hope you continue to join us in the future to our IMPRI Web Policy Talk and Web Policy Learning. Wishing everyone a very good evening. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, Arjuna.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Arjun. Bye. Thank you, Ashish. Thank you, Bhargavi.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.